welcome into the show. It is Daniel Wortman coming to you live from the Dreamagine Sports Studios. It is 9 a.m. on the East Coast. This is your 6 a.m. West Coast wake-up call. In all time zones in between and around the world, it is Wednesday, June the 5th. Coming up in just a few minutes, we have R.E. Nicholson on Twitter, otherwise known as Ruth Nicholson, coming to you live in an interview about some really good governance and some other things. I look forward to getting with her and talking to her about some of her insight and feedback into governance and operations, etc., in the club game and just in organizational aspects. I think it's going to be a good chat. So if you were under a rock in the last 24 hours, then you missed one of the biggest days for a U20 team in the World Cup, U20 World Cup cycle ever for the U.S., and that was the U.S. beating France in the U20 World Cup, the very first knockout round. Because the U.S. finished second in their group, they had to face up against France, and we talked about it on the show yesterday. It was going to be a tough climb. One of the things that we were looking at was, how would they try to play? Would they try to stay true to themselves? Would they be able to clean up enough of their play? Would they abandon what they're trying to do tactically, etc.? Watching the game yesterday, what we saw was courage from that U20 squad and from Tab and his staff. They said, look, we want to play a certain way. We are going to define for us as the right way, and we're going to stay true to that. And we're going to try to be patient. We're going to try to keep our composure. We're going to try to stay calm in the moment. And they went up 1-0, and France equalized. And when France equalized, it's kind of like that might have been the chance. Just kind of watching the flow of the game. Number 10 for France was just unbelievable, and I just kept waiting on him to break us down again. This was really good on the ball, and he eventually did from the wing and off of a shot that went off the post, rebound. France goes up 2-1, and I'm sitting there going, man, that might have been it. And the U.S., though, they didn't panic. They didn't start to just lump the ball down the field. They didn't look like what our senior national team has looked like for so long in that environment, in that moment, which was encouraging. That this group of players they were not freaking out on the field, and certainly their coach, Tab Ramos, was not freaking out on the sideline either. They were staying calm. They were staying true to what they wanted to try to do, how they wanted to try to play, and they kept going. And that is also a sign, a measure of composure and maturity that, quite frankly, we just haven't seen a lot of on the men's side of the ledger, especially. And so to see that play out was really nice. And they are able to work an equalizer and then follow it up less than 10 minutes later with the game winner, the match winner. And from there, you get up 3-2. Now, what do you look like? And we talked about this on Monday when Liverpool got the lead at the beginning of the Champions League final. For the rest of that first half, especially, it definitely looked like both outside backs, Trent Alexander-Arnold, as well as Andy Robertson, for Liverpool, were a little nervy. I didn't see a lot of that when the U.S. went up yesterday. Everybody seemed to remain pretty calm. They were, working. They were trying to follow a game plan, make sure that they executed that game plan. Were there some moments, where I wouldn't call it panic defending, but urgent defending in and around the box? Yeah, but I mean, look, that's part of it. I mean, you're trying to see out a game, but it didn't seem like the team overall had a level of panic in the way that they approached the end of that game when they were down 2-1, when they were even 2-2, or when they went up 3-2. So that is progress in and of itself, and I was encouraged by that. And you want the results no matter what, for sure. But it was encouraging to see this team get a result without throwing out the game plan, without throwing out composure, without it becoming just a freak out fest. We're going to stay calm. We're going to stay true. We're going to follow the plan. Let's work this thing out. Another thing I saw was Tab Ramos, and I don't think the guy's gotten enough credit for his work in the youth national team space. He's been the only consistent figure in the youth national team space over the last several years. A lot have come and gone, and he's still there. And one of the things that I saw yesterday was Tab was very calm on the sideline. He was coaching, but he was very calm. He was not freaking out, and he was keeping his composure. Even after the win, he wasn't running around freaking out. It's like, hey, let's act like we've been here before. We should expect to win these games. Mentality-wise, I really felt like, he was also leading by example in that moment. You win a big game, but let's act like we deserve to win a big game. When you watch, especially like American sports, whether it's American football, basketball, not as much really in baseball, but especially in those two sports. And if you watch any of those sports at a college level, you'll see teams that win big games against someone that they don't expect to win, and everyone rushes the court or they rush the field, and they freak out. And then you see those teams, those college programs that expect to win those games, and rarely do you see their fans run on the field or run on the court because they expect it to win. It's not a freak out moment. So yesterday, I felt like that was a really good teaching moment, modeling moment that Tab was able to do. And I don't know if it was intentional or not, but for those players, he wasn't freaking out, running around like, oh my gosh, we won everything, or we won this big match, or we won the sky's the limit. But he was just very calm, very reserved, like, hey, let's respect the opponent. Let's act as if we've been here before. And, let's handle ourselves with composure, even post-match, in the way that we carry ourselves. So I thought it was an outstanding day. It was an outstanding, fight, the spirit there to fight for that win. But fight for the win in the way that they did was the thing that was encouraging. I definitely appreciated that from Tab, his staff, and those players as well. And one of the things I think that we've got to look at is how does that begin to enter into our senior teams and next year with our Olympic team. Can we get that kind of composure and expectation and talent and ability, both technical and tactical? Can we get all of that to start to merge? And can we start to really develop players in mass? For a country this large, for a country this socioeconomically diverse, culturally diverse, etc., we should have a talent pool that is much wider and much deeper than it is. Our system is not reaching and connecting and finding every player possible. So I think there are a lot of talented kids out there in the States that are not getting a look, never going to get a look, and that's a shame because our talent pool could be even bigger, even better, and it should be. We should be a powerhouse on the international stage. Days like yesterday should become the norm. And that's the lesson I think we should all take leaving yesterday's matches. We shouldn't get wrapped up in hysteria. We should calm down, and we should recognize that moment should become part of our normal experience. We should expect that kind of result, but also that kind of performance. And if we begin to set our expectations at that level, then we have to go and address, how do we get there? How do we reach a level where on an international stage, we're not the underdog against France? How do we reach a level where when our women's national team head into a World Cup, that they are not just favorites, but the predominant favorites? And that is every cycle. How do we get to that place? How do we reach that level? We are not there. We are nowhere near there. Our current system isn't getting us there. And despite proclamations from U.S. Soccer, from Don Garber and Major League Soccer, we're never going to get there under the current system. It's never going to happen, period. That system, that model, that philosophy that has ruled and reigned over U.S. soccer for more than 20 years is predicated on a mentality of artificial scarcity. And when you operate off of a philosophy of artificial scarcity, it means that you necessarily lock out others to artificially inflate demand and create artificial levels of investment, or as I like to call it, extortion from cities and ownership groups, because we're going to pit Las Vegas against St. Louis, against Sacramento, and we're only going to pick one. That's a gatekeeper system of artificial scarcity. This country is wealthy enough, it is large enough, it has enough resources to become the greatest soccer country on earth. If we unleash our potential, we can find talent, we can find coaches, we can unleash our potential in a way we've never even imagined. And the only way that's possible is to change the mindset at a federation level from artificial scarcity to access and opportunity. And if we do that, if we change that mentality, then results like yesterday can start to become the norm and not a one-off, not rare. And I hope we get there, because those players proved we have some talent. Those players also showed that if we can produce that group of players, we can continue to produce even more players. Last year when Eric Winaldo was running for president of U.S. Soccer, he and I had a conversation about Christian Pulisic. And he said to me, and he also said this publicly in some interviews as well, but one time we were riding in the car to an event, and while we were in the car and having a conversation, he brought up this idea of talent in this country, that we have so much talent, so much of it that goes unnoticed, unseen, undiscovered. And he said to me, I believe right now in America, there are 100 Christian Pulisic's. Not one, but 100. But most will never get found. Christian Pulisic is heading to Chelsea to play in the Premier League. Now, do we have 100? I don't know. But is there a likelihood, just based on mathematical statistics, that we have more than one Christian Pulisic? Probably so. And what that statement really is identifying is that we are not identifying the talent. We are not finding the talent, and we are not rewarding those who discover and develop the talent. And that's what has to change. That is what has to get better. That is what we need in order to get real progress and change in this country. So anyway, big day yesterday. Congratulations to that U20 team as they move on in the U20 World Cup. It was a big day. It was exciting. Really happy for those guys. Keep fighting. Let's see how far we can go. The road ahead is much easier than the hurdle you just got over, but you can't slip. You've got to stay focused, stay locked in, and I'm sure Tab and his staff are going to get those guys ready for the next match. So World Cup 2019 kicks off on Friday, and really excited for that as well. Ruth Nicholson is coming up just after this break, and stay tuned for that. Our sponsor this half hour is Duck Kick Brand. If you haven't checked out Duck Kick Brand, check them out at duckkickbrand.com, and if you place an order, use the promo code DWSHOW. Again, that promo code is DWSHOW. You will get 10% off your order and support this show at the same time. So thanks for doing that, and thanks for supporting Duck Kick Brand. They've got really cool products. If you're a soccer coach, a soccer player, etc., you should check them out. More info at duckkickbrand.com. We will be right back after this. Welcome back to the show. Thanks for tuning in this Wednesday morning. We are really pleased to be joined by Ruth Nicholson, who is the co-creator of the 2019 think tank to improve youth sports and the founder of Go. Ruth, welcome to the show, and thanks for coming on this morning.
Oh, good to be with you.
So tell us a little bit. I'm fascinated and curious at the same time about your work. First, with the 2019 International Think Tank to Improve Youth Sports. That is one giant enchilada of a mess that you have chosen to try to work on. So give us a little bit of information about that.
So it actually was an online event in mid to late March 2019. And in 2018, late 2018, Reed Maltby and I, Reed Maltby with Raising Excellence, he and I were talking about, we actually were complaining about people complaining about youth sports. And our complaint, if you will, was we're really good at complaining and we are less adept at coming up with solutions and things people can do in their local communities that actually will make the situation better. Like moving off the dime of complaining to, okay, so what are we going to do about it? And we came up with 6 different pieces of youth sports, everything from coaching the sport itself, the technical pieces of it, to the mental and social pieces, the club and infrastructure organizational pieces. And we went nuts. We engaged Sam Snow, who's the retired technical director from U.S. Youth Soccer, and Gordon McClellan, who's working with parents in sport in the UK. And we got 10 speakers for each of these 6 sections. And we said, okay, we want you to ground your presentations in proven practice or scientific research. And we want you to leave with at least 2 takeaways that they could try at home that would make a difference in their communities and their sport. And by the way, you can't go longer than 30 minutes. And we kicked it off. We ended up with 62 sessions. We actually had a couple of extra sessions. Reed and I did morning and evening keynotes. We're in the process now of converting all of those sessions to online on CoachTube. The result was we thought it would be like a North American thing, and we were pretty excited about that. And then we had Gordon in the UK, so it might be a little bigger than North America. We ended up with people from 24 sports on 5 continents. We had a university in South Africa. We had Australian rules football coaches from Australia. I mean, it was so much more engaged than even we thought it would be. And I did up a journal, a reflection journal, to help people take notes. And it was built off of the improvisational theater approach of what, so what, now what? What is this thing? What do we know about it? So what being, well, what does it mean? What are the implications? And now what being, well, what am I going to do about it? So it was really focused on, we don't want to complain, we want to do something about it. And we're looking forward to doing it again in 2020.
So what drives you to do this work? I know you have, you're the founder of Go, but where did this drive to engage in this arena with this topic come from?
It comes from 2 places. One is that I'm actually a Title IX kid. When I was a little girl, my younger brother, who I really love, but my younger brother could play sport, and nobody questioned that. And I was told, well, you're a girl, you can't play sports, which didn't set well with me. So there's part of me that's still like, I'm going to show you I can be involved in sport. And the other part has to do with a very personal story about a coach and my youngest son, and the difference that young coach played in my son's life. And a lot of Go is playing it forward as a thank you to that coach.
So what do you mind sharing that story about your younger son and what inspired you?
My younger son?
Yeah.
Well, my younger son had suffered with depression on and off, starting when he was 9. And when his father left, he was 13, and he was seriously depressed. He was writing suicide notes, and that's a scary thing, if you're a single parent. And his coach had some similar experiences with divorce in his family, and was really there in a role that coaches don't necessarily sign up for. I mean, but that coach helped save my son's life, and that's a big deal. At least to me, it is.
I would say so. We often conflate, sports to life or death issues. But I mean, when you're talking about literal life or death, I would say that is a big deal. And so in your inspiration from that interaction, that influence that coach had on your son, it inspired you to set forth on a path and a journey to launch Go. And what exactly is Go for the audience? What describe what it is and what your mission is with Go.
So Go literally stands for governance and operations. That's what the G and the O part stand for. And I've coached in my younger years and discovered that I'm an okay coach. I am much, much more talented when it comes to helping boards of directors, volunteers, parents, that group of people that I call them the off-field team. They're all those adults that actually have to play nice together so that our kids actually have fields to play on, shirts that match, referees that show up, all of the stuff that's actually not the glamorous part of sport. And so the mission actually is, if I can help clubs organize and operate efficiently, whether it's with paid staff or volunteer staff, that translates into support for coaches. I work with I developed something a couple of years ago, and I call it the 7 deadly challenges of youth sports organizations. And it's all about, from an operational standpoint, what are the big headaches that clubs face? And Go is all about reducing or getting rid of those headaches so coaches can go do what they do best, which is be in the sport with our kids. So it's, even though it's focused on governance and operations, ultimately it's about supporting coaches so they can do what they want to do. Because most coaches I know don't really like going to board meetings and really aren't enamored of doing administrative stuff.
Certainly not. And I would say that there are a lot of coaches who are forced to do so, who are not interested or gifted in that area either, but have to just because of necessity. And so any work in that area that can be done that makes that work either more efficient, more productive, more meaningful, etc., I'm sure it helps. What sports in youth sports do you work with or have a concentration in, if any at all, in your work?
Soccer is still the largest part. I do some work with hockey. I've done some work with USA football, a little bit with volleyball and basketball. One of the really amazing things about the think tank is expanding that network of people in multiple sports. Done a little bit of work with ice sports, skating, figure skating, and track skating both. So it's expanding a bit, but it's still heavy to soccer. And that's the sport that I played. That's the sport that my kids played. Although my grandson just took up t-ball. So there may be baseball in his future.
Well, good luck with that. With the t-ball thing, I used to run a local baseball league, and by the time my second son got to t-ball, he played 2 years and was like, "Dad, this is boring. I just want to play soccer." I said, "Okay, bud, we're going. Let's go play soccer. We're good."
My daughter-in-law's family has she has a couple of uncles who actually played in the major League Baseball. So I know there's a passion for that on that side of the family.
Well, that definitely plays into it. Makes sense for sure. So in your work, in whether it's with a soccer club, whether it's with any other sport, if someone were to bring you in and say, okay, hey, we need some help What are some of the issues, specifically the examples that you are seeing that you're trying to help them overcome, challenges you're trying to help them solve, etc., in order to improve that off the field experience of these clubs?
Yeah, I would sort of put them in two broad categories. One of the biggest needs, and not many clubs do it, is having an annual board orientation or a periodic strategic planning session so that you're helping the people on your board of directors understand their roles and understand how their roles, if they're parents of players in your club, how their roles as a parent are different than their role as a board member, and the importance of actually keeping them separate. I've done way too many mediations where a board member has an issue with a coach or a team and then barges in as an unhappy parent, but pulls the power of the board member with them, and it creates an absolute disaster. So orienting boards, helping them understand, what the legal responsibilities are. When you say yes to being on a board of directors, you're talking about financial responsibility, about managing staff, managing programs. It's not a small undertaking. And the other is helping clubs, plan for what they want to do and who they want to be, not just sort of bumbling from season to season to season. The other piece has to do with setting up volunteer programs that you really get the most out of volunteers. I mean, when I was a kid, it was common for a lot of our moms, stayed home and did, much of their work at home. And there was this pool of volunteer labor. I mean, it's almost sort of like Leave It to Beaver, right? But while we were at school, my mom was working at home, but she also had the opportunity to help at church or with the Girl Scouts or the YMCA or the soccer club or whatever that volunteer thing was that was close to her heart. As more of us have two parents who are working outside the home or we're single parents, that volunteer labor pool has changed, and we're now trying to fit all that volunteer stuff between when we get home from work and bedtime. And by the way, we have soccer practice and dinner and bath and homework. And so it's become even more important that our volunteer programs make the best use of the folks who are helping us out, that we don't have long drawn out meetings that waste folks' time, that the roles we ask people to fill are manageable and specific and meaningful. It doesn't do to say, well, would you just show up on Tuesday and work until we're done? It needs to be more meaningful. And in a pay to play system, you've already got the rub of, if I'm paying for my child to play and you want me to volunteer, that volunteer experience better have some quality to it.
What have you learned, and what do you try to impart to these clubs? Let's say that you are a pay to play youth club and you are trying to recruit volunteers and build a volunteer program for your club so that you can do more, because you may have the ability to have paid staff, and you may have the ability to pay coaches, some part-time, some full-time, etc. But to really do everything that needs to get done, you're likely still going to need to lean on an army of volunteers, whether that's tournaments, whether that's special events. It could be board member roles, etc. What have you learned in your work and kind of tried to help clubs with in terms of recruiting volunteers, keeping volunteers, and running a quality volunteer program?
I think in a nutshell, like in a headline, it's go slow to go fast. And what I mean by that is I talk about the equation, the volunteer equation: 3 parts planning, 1 part work, and 1 part gratitude. And it's hard to slow down. I mean, if you talk to directors of coaching and coaches and board members, their to-do list is really, really long, and it's like there aren't enough hours in the day. But the go slow to go fast, if you really sit down and say, what are the jobs specifically that I need volunteers to do, and outline what that is, and I'm talking job descriptions, like what is the task, how long is it going to take, what do people need to know to do that job. There's almost always a training component. Even if you're picking up trash at a tournament, you still have to know where the garbage cans are and where the garbage bags are and where you're going to dump the garbage bags. I mean, it might not be fancy training, but there's still stuff you got to know, right? So what are the jobs? How long is it going to take? What training is needed? And what are the supplies that people need to do the job, and who's going to provide the supplies? I had one club that had outlined some job descriptions for folks to help get player cards for the kids, and made the assumption, and the player cards had to be laminated. It was a rule of the league. And when they did the job description, they were silent on who was going to laminate the player cards. Now, that doesn't sound like a big deal, but if you don't have a laminator sitting in your office, it becomes a question. How are you going to do it? Who's going to pay for it? And if I'm, running 1 or 2 teams, at some point, I'm going to notice that that's money. So doing the work about what are the jobs, describe the jobs. So when I come to you and I say, hey, Daniel, I need help for 2 hours on Saturday picking up trash at the tournament. Are you in? And you might say, well, you might want to check the schedule to see if your child is playing or not. But I am much more likely to get a yes out of you if I'm specific, 2 hours on a Saturday picking up trash, than if I say, hey, could you come Sunday afternoon and I think we're going to have to pick up the tournament, and it might take a while, and you have no idea how long it's going to be, what you're going to be doing. The more specific you are, the more likely people are going to say yes. And if you don't ask, they can't say yes. The other thing is the literature in volunteer management, and this has been around since the 1970s, is if the job you're asking somebody to do takes more than about 10 hours a week on average, you're setting volunteers up for burnout and turnover. So looking at how you structure the jobs, how long are they, how involved. So it's okay if you ask somebody, be my uniform coordinator, and it's going to be absolutely nuts for about 3 weeks. But then, the rest of the year is not quite so difficult. But if you ask a board member and you're expecting them to put in 15 hours a week for a 2-year term, you're in the danger zone from the get-go. So that 3 parts planning, which is, it's work and it's not terribly exciting, that makes it easier to recruit and retain volunteers because you've got your act together. You've been really specific about what you need. And then the last piece is actually saying thank you. I mean, being really grateful for what people give you in terms of their volunteer time. Because some of the jobs you're asking people to do, they can be hard. They can be really unglamorous. I mean, picking up trash at a tournament isn't necessarily at the top of everybody's list, but it sure is important. The people who are renting you those fields aren't going to rent them to you if you leave them a mess.
Certainly not. And field space is always a hot topic in cities around this country, access to fields, et cetera. So not you never want to burn that bridge because without field space, you're not running a program and someone else is in your place. So That's really, really good information and good insight about volunteerism and board responsibilities, board roles, etc. And so when you're looking at these clubs, so a youth pay to play club, and you're having conversations with them. When you look at kind of that 50,000 foot view, getting out of the implementation piece for a second, what is the conversation like that you're trying to have with them about their purpose, their why, about what they're doing that kind of guides the how it gets done?
I think helping clubs have a sense of where they fit in this. What is it that Gordon calls it? It's a game of chutes and ladders. Gordon McClellan over in the UK. It's one of his articles. Because the landscape is so confusing. I mean, clubs that are just recreational, clubs that are based in a faith community or an ethnic community, clubs that have teams playing in the DA or the ENCL. There increasingly more clubs in USL that have everything from a recreational to a competitive, leading all the way up to both men's and women's professional teams. And so trying to figure out where you fit in as an individual club in your community becomes really important, because not all clubs are going to feed a professional team. And having a sense of who you are, what are the types of players that you're there to serve, and then building out your coaching staff and your curriculum and your approach that matches that. And again, it's another go slow to go fast. And I mean, it's a confusing place. And you look at a lot of metropolitan areas, and you can find that fit all of those niches. So I think the other piece and the other message, which it might be a soapbox by now, but I learned it 14 years ago when I started working with Bobby Howe, who has a pedigree as a player and a coach and a director of coaching at the national, state, and local levels. And he said, the secret of making a club work, and it doesn't matter the competitive level, and it actually doesn't matter the age, is a balance. And you imagine it's a three-legged stool, and there's a player sitting on the stool. And you and I both know if you have a three-legged stool and one or more of the legs is too short or too long, the player falls off the stool, right? And the three legs, one is really visible and the other two aren't. The first leg is all about coaching and players and the game. And that's the most visible. That's how we judge clubs. The second leg of the stool is governance, is that board of directors or the owner of the club. It's that financial, human resources, legal stuff. And the third leg is the operations and administration leg, the getting the fields, the getting the uniforms, getting the referees, handling the money, that day-to-day operational stuff. And the fact is that the go piece, those two legs, exist to support coaches and players. So if you're working in those two legs, if you can't make a direct tie between what you're doing as a board member or an administrator to a player, a team, or a coach, you'd better think really hard about why you're spending time and energy on that thing. So you may not be that visible, but those three legs have to be in balance where that player falls off the stool, even though what we mostly see, is the coaching and the game side. And trying to help people understand that balance means that the adults who play in those three places have to be a team off the field. Because if we're snarking at each other, we're not doing our players any good.
So one of the things that I have noticed when I have talked to clubs, experienced clubs, firsthand, etc., is there's a conversation that is had between the club and the community about what their intentions are. There's often an experience. You hope as a club that your intentions match the experience that you're trying to give to these families, to these players. So you may give this lofty speech about player development and how you want them to play, how you want them to learn, to love the game, etc. And you're hoping that your programming supports that and provides that developmental environment, that positive experience, etc. And one of the things I've noticed is clubs are missing one key piece to this, and that is not having their staff on the same page, whether that be from a curriculum standpoint in terms of what we're going to teach and how we're going to teach it. We often everyone's familiar in the U.S. especially with the idea of schooling, and you have your subjects, math, science, English, history, etc. But your teachers are operating off of a curriculum and a schedule and what their program is going to be, and it's generally following a path. Obviously, you're adapting for your class and the students in your class, etc., but you're taking them down kind of an education pathway that is a plan. Have you noticed in your conversations and in your work, have you seen a lot of curriculum-based, let's really put in that extra time and have the planning in place so that our coaches are all on the same page, whether they're dealing with younger kids, maybe middle school age kids or high school kids? Or have you seen this also to be an area where there is a void in terms of preparation and planning, matching up with expectations or proclamations to the parents and the kids themselves?
I think there are a lot of folks who want to make that a reality, to have a solid curriculum and to have that that stability and that vision and ultimately that success, right? Because if the curriculum is good, you're assuming that then the player development is quality. I actually think there are two things that get in the way. Well, maybe three things that get in the way of achieving that, and in no particular order. One is that, particularly in sort of the competitive piece of youth sports, there's a whole lot of turnover in both players and in coaches between clubs year to year to year. And if you're trying to develop this culture and this curriculum, because think about it. If your child starts playing soccer in, first grade and plays all the way through high school, that's what, 10 years, give or take?
Right.
That's a lot of years over which to grow in ability and understanding of the game. What are the odds in this day and age? And I don't have the data, but how many kids do we know, even between the two of us, that stayed with the same club for all 10 of those years? How many coaches do we know that have stayed with a club for 10 years, which is kind of that cycle, if you will? So part of it is we've got turnover, and if you're trying to create consistency, turnover, just like turnover in volunteers, is a little bit of a tough thing to deal with.
I think another piece is our coaches volunteer, which can have a turnover component. Are they contract employees or are they direct employees, like W-2 employees? Because the rules about how tightly you can supervise a contractor versus a direct employee also plays into sort of the maverick component that can come with coaches. Like it's my team, I'm going to do what I like with it. And that tension with, no, this is a club and we have a curriculum and a culture and we want to sort of, rally around that and support that. So you have that human resources factor about how we hire and supervise coaches. But I actually think the thing that makes it the most difficult is actually the first of my 7 deadly challenges for youth sports clubs, which is our director of coaching has so much administrative work to do that she or he doesn't have time to work with our coaches and players. That the way we define the job of a director of coaching in a club, or maybe we call him a technical director, but the way we put that on the director of coaching has all this other stuff that either is assumed they will do or just sort of lands on them. That they're always fighting through the administrative stuff. And what gets shortchanged is the curriculum and that going out, being with coaches, mentoring coaches, seeing where the needs are. I mean, how many directors of coaching do we know? And they say, well, in order to justify your salary, you also get to coach 1 or 2 teams. Well, the minute we ask a director of coaching to coach teams on top of all those other jobs, you've compromised her ability to then spend time with teams that practice at the same time or have games at the same time. So I think we've got a system that is organized that makes it really hard for clubs to do what you're asking, even though it's a really good idea.
So speaking of coaching, as we come to towards the end here of our conversation, I wanted to ask you a coaching story of yours concerning pink rain boots. And I'm curious I'm curious to hear your story here on coaching in pink rain boots.
Pink rain boots. This is the pinnacle of my coaching career. And I did, as a young person, I coached the high school team when I was in high school because we had trouble getting a high school team after Title IX. And I coached middle school kids when I was at university. And 20 years after Title IX was passed, I was a mom and I had kindergarten age kids. And my husband was coaching at the YMCA. So imagine a co-ed kindergarten team at the YMCA. And my husband worked in aerospace and his company said, you've got to go to Brazil for 3 weeks to work on this plane. And he had a license and he wrote out lesson plans for me for the 3 weeks. 3 weeks he was going to be gone. He says, you got to coach the team. I said, well, I don't think I can screw up kindergarten. And I had games and he says, now it'll be fine. We're in Seattle. We're just north of Seattle, Washington. So the fact that people wear rain boots here is not surprising. He says, there's a little girl on the team and her mom really wants her to play. But she's not into it. She shows up for practice in pink rain boots and this big puffy pink jacket, and she is not going to play. She's not going to engage. She doesn't want to be there. I said, okay. So I'm going to be nice to her. I'm going to invite her to participate, but I won't be brokenhearted if she just doesn't. 3 weeks later, he comes back from Brazil, and this little girl is all in. She has cleats and socks and shorts, and she's like the first one there, and she's playing and having a great time. And my husband said, what did you do? And I said, I don't know. I did what you told me. I stayed to the lesson plan, everything we did. I invited her to play. I don't know. And her mother says, I can tell you what she did. I can tell you exactly what you did. I'm like, good, because I don't have a clue. Now, mind you, this is 20 years after the passage of Title IX. This is like the late 1990s. She says, my kindergarten daughter did not believe that she could play soccer until she saw another woman play soccer.
Wow.
Well, that's like winning the World Cup. Like, I retired at the top of my game with my pink rain boots.
That's a fantastic story, and it is such a good truth as well. I'm a big believer, and I'm going to assume you are as well. But in listening to you share stories and your insight, have to believe you are as well, of modeling. Model what you want to see happen, leadership through modeling and building that culture, of doing, taking action, etc. And it is so important to have mentors, to have people that inspire you, that can kind of get you from where you are to where you want to go or where you want to be, and ultimately that is the role of the coach. And in this case, your story with the pink rain boots is spot on, and I'm sure that you have beamed with pride each time you tell that story. You can hear it coming through the phone as you share that story, and you should be proud because you made an impact and changed her life, and ultimately that's what a coach should be in the business of doing, which is improving the lives of those around them. So Ruth, I want to thank you for coming on the show. I would like to for the audience to be able to connect with you or follow your work. Where could they find out more information about what you do and where you're at on social media so that maybe they could interact with you, etc.?
Okay, my the website is gohelpsports.com, and that goes to my company website. I'm actually a professional facilitator and mediator, so there are pieces of it that are youth sports and pieces of it that are some of my other work. Gohelpsports.com. I'm on Twitter at R.E. Nicholson, Nichoolson, spelled like Jack Nicholson, except it's R.E. in the front. And I'm on LinkedIn as well.
Fantastic. Well, I really appreciate you coming on the show and sharing your insight and stories. And there was so much there. I've made a page of notes listening to you kind of share insights. I'm a big believer in organizational and operational excellence, and doing what you do and figuring out ways to do it better, et cetera. And so I really appreciate you coming on the show and sharing some of that insight, and definitely look forward to having you back on again in the near future to talk more about youth sports. Maybe we can get into some of the worst, bad, ugly things you've ever seen, and maybe we can find a way to solve some of those together on a future chat, because there's plenty to go around.
At this hour, I'm going to have a second cup of tea to do that.
Right, for sure. Well, look, thank you for coming on the show. Really appreciate it, and we are really glad that you were able to stop by this morning and share your thoughts and insights.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. That was Ruth Nicholson, and like I said, if you want to learn about her work, find out more about her work, you can do so. Find her on Twitter at R.E. Nicholson, and go to her website, learn more as well. And great insight there. So thanks for joining the show. We will be right back after this break.
No one, no man, no woman, no child should ever have to drink green water with bugs, with algae, with disease in it. Bad water and a lack of toilets kills more people than all the wars in the world. We know how to bring clean drinking water right now to every single person on earth. And when you can bring water into communities, it truly transforms them. It changes everything. Or you could know that you'd made a difference. You could know that you had truly impacted the life of a family, of a community, of a region. There was either clean water or there wasn't. We believe in a world where every single person has clean and safe water to drink, and we will continue fighting until that happens.
Well, thanks for tuning into the show today. Thanks for Ruth Nicholson coming on the show. It was a great conversation. Look forward to having her back on again in the near future. Tonight, the U.S. men's national team have a friendly against Jamaica. I believe that's 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we'll see how that goes. There's no way to tell with a friendly coming off the season, but, it is what it is. But, again, big win for the U20 team yesterday. It was incredible. So, like to thank Charity Water for the sponsorship this half hour. Duck Kick brand also came on the show this week, and like to thank Ruth for coming on the show. It was definitely a good chat. And when you're looking at governance and you're looking at operations and you're trying to figure out how can we do what we do better, it is definitely worth taking a deep dive into how you do what you do, and Ruth has a lot of insight into that. So it was definitely a good chat with her. Definitely enjoyed having her on, and definitely will have her on again in the future. Thanks for watching the show. Thanks for tuning in. We will be back again tomorrow, and the World Cup, the women's edition of the World Cup kicks off Friday with France. So set your clocks, set your alarms, tune in. I think it's going to be a really good World Cup, and look forward to seeing what happens. It's going to be a big challenge for the U.S. national team, and they may possibly be facing off against France. We'll see how the group stages go, etc. But it's going to be an interesting World Cup, and I think the attention and the eyeballs and the enthusiasm is going to be pretty high. So look forward to that kicking off on Friday. See everyone again tomorrow, 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can watch live on danielworkman.com. We'll see everybody tomorrow.